He's the newest member of the State House, just sworn in to serve the residents of the 87th District. Joining me is State Representative Greg Rothman. Representative, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Why don't we start off a little bit about your ambitions. Why did you decide to run for office?
Well, we had an excellent representative for 10 years, Glenn Grell, and when he stepped down to move on to an important position in the state, there was an opening. I was asked to run. When he stepped down, I stepped up, and wanting to do good work and be a public servant. That's my ambition.
And we know with special election, the time frame's a little bit crunched, but I'm assuming you knocked on doors, talked to a lot of constituents. And as you were doing that, what was their biggest concern?
Well, a couple. I mean, the 87th District is made up of parts of Cumberland County just on the west of the capital. So I have a lot of retired state workers, a lot of existing state workers, a lot of people who aspire to work with the state or have some relationship with the state and their business. So the budget's a big concern, and fiscal responsibility, keeping the promises to the people that had paid into the pension, but also reforming the pension in order to protect it and protect future workers too.
Now, we're already started the session, but we're only a few months in, so you still got a lot of time before the next election. So what is your goals for this session? What do you hope to accomplish as the new representative?
The nice thing about running a special election is you don't have a lot of time to think about why you're running. You sort of jump in and you start swimming, and so I don't have a lot of I don't have an agenda. At least for the first few months, I want to proportionally use my ears and my mouth and keep my mouth shut and my ears open and learn as much about the process. I know the 87th District pretty well. I've lived there all my life. I've run a business there and raised my family and live there, of course, now. But I don't know this place, and I'm learning my way around. I still get lost, but I'm learning my way around the Capitol complex. So. And also learn my way around the legislative process. So I intend to listen more than to talk.
In your experience as a businessman, what do you think makes Pennsylvania either good or bad for businesses that are looking to start up here?
Yeah, specifically central Pennsylvania, which I know better than anything else. It's the people. And we have a tremendous labor force. The hard workers. My grandfather had a farm over in Lower Paxton Township, just 5 miles from here, and got up every morning before the sun came up, took care of the animals, came to work, actually worked for the state and the labor department, and all the people I've ever been around have been hard workers, and that's what I know about central Pennsylvania. It's a lot of hard-working people, and businesses like hard work, and it passes on to our children too. So I think that's the labor force is the number one resource that we have here in the state of Pennsylvania, and certainly in central Pennsylvania.
You talked a little bit about running a business in central Pennsylvania area. Why don't we go a little deeper as far as what your background is and how you think that your background, especially as a businessman, is going to help you be a good legislator for the people of the 87th District?
Yeah, I started out 26 years ago after I graduated from college as a real estate agent. Worked all commission. Pretty much my whole career has been all working, waking up every morning unemployed. The first year I was in real estate, I made $8,000 all by myself. That was 26 years ago, so it's more like $10,000 today. But just kept working hard and grew the business, helped to grow the business. After 10 years, I became a partner, and after a couple years after that, about 14 years ago, I became president and CEO of the company. It's RSR Realtors. We're based in Lemoyne. We were started in 1970, so we've been in business for 45 years. And now I have a son and a brother, and my father's still there running the company as I come here. So you learn a lot running a business, and I like to think that there are some things that we learned in business, especially in down times. We went through a down real estate market in '08 through about 10 or 11, where we had to look at every dollar we were spending and try to figure out a way do we have to spend this money? Is there a way to do it more efficient? And it was amazing. We cut our budget by about 25%, and we're still able to produce the same product. But we did have to work harder, and we did have to think smarter and be more efficient too.
As you know now, the state budget due on July 1st, start of the new fiscal year, is now over a month and a half late. So you coming in, it's a very interesting time here in the State House. What do you see as the the biggest stumbling block in regards to budget negotiations?
Well, it's pretty foreign to me, the idea that something's due on the 30th of June and it's not. I mean, I'm used to paying mortgage payments and paying bills and delivering product and deadlines and contracts. We have to set, property sold, you're supposed to settle by June 30th, you settle. So you don't always agree, and there are times during the negotiations you don't agree, but you know that we have a settlement date and we're supposed to settle on that day. So this is foreign to me that we don't have a budget. Now, I mean, we lived through it under the Rendell administration, so I'm certainly aware of it, but the concept of not sticking to a deadline is, businesses aren't used to that. And so the first thing is that both sides need to be resolved, and the Republicans certainly are, that we should have a budget. And so I'd like to think that the governor will also come to the table now that we're back in session and get a budget done.
What do you think it's going to take in order to get this budget finally done? And looking forward a little bit, what do you think can be done to help prevent a situation like this, considering we know for at least the next budget cycle, we are still going to have a legislature strongly controlled by Republicans, but a Democrat in the executive office?
Yeah, well, I think that I've read the Republican budget and I've looked at the spending priorities, and most importantly looked at the fact that it increases spending by 3.6%. So I don't know many businesses in my district or families that have increased their spending by 3.6% without also increasing their revenues. So I'm supportive of a budget that does not raise any taxes and don't think it's necessary. We had a record amount of revenues that came in last year, and if you can provide all the services that you provided the year before and increase them by 3.6%, that seems to me a pretty reasonable budget. But I don't know what it's going to take. And I don't think that we need to increase our budget by 16%. I certainly don't believe in all the taxes that the governor is putting forth, and will not support them. So I think that you can have, in real estate transactions, two people who both believe they're right, but they come together on a compromise without compromising the principles. Rather, you're compromising maybe spending priorities and letting the governor decide where certain money goes without increasing revenues or increasing taxes.
What do you say to people when they criticize either the governor or the General Assembly for not being able to pass a budget by its constitutional deadline? Well,
the Republicans did pass a budget within the time period. So, I mean, at that point, the governor has all kinds of resources, including a line item budget. He could have, as Governor Rendell did, pass certain parts of the budget and veto other parts. So I, at the risk of sounding partisan, I mean, I think the governor's to blame for there not being a budget passed.
Education is always a big topic around budget time, and it's been front and center during this impasse also. What are your thoughts in regards to school funding? Do you think we need more funding? And also, do you think the schools here in central Pennsylvania are fairly funded compared to others around the state?
Well, and I'm blessed. My district has the 3 great public schools and a couple pretty good private schools too. So people in the 87th district love their schools, and they're getting a very small percentage of their budget from the state. I mean, Cumberland Valley, I think it's 10%, maybe 20% at the most. But we have to look at to answer your question, do we need to spend more money on education? Unfortunately, what we're spending more money on is the pension crisis. And so if we don't solve the pension crisis, we're going to keep spending more money on education. So this isn't a debate about whether we should spend more money on books. This is about how much the state is going to contribute to the pension crisis that the school districts have, which frankly I talked about during the campaign was the fault of some people in Harrisburg who didn't properly fund the pension when we had in 2001 or 2002 110% funded pension. So we need to solve the pension crisis, or we're going to keep spending more money on education just to meet those obligations.
Governor, one of his biggest issues is that in order to increase education spending, we need to have a severance tax on the Marcellus Shale companies. Do you think that is a good way to fund our schools?
I don't. And I think that the idea of taxing something more in order to create revenue, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get more revenue. And in fact, I believe that if you cut taxes, you'll create more revenue. And we know, going back to Ronald Reagan, he cut taxes and created a record amount of revenue. So the tax rates are what we have to look at. And Marcellus and I do know a little bit about natural gas, and the prices are so low that it doesn't make sense to produce more of it. So we're going to rely on a funding source that may not be there. I mean, obviously we have a great resource in natural gas, but we ought to be doing stuff to encourage more production and encourage more of it to get to help bring back manufacturing jobs and more jobs, which ultimately, the way you create revenue for state is by having people working and making more money and paying more income tax at the same rate we have. That's the way you generate more revenue. But no, I disagree with the severance tax, though I certainly understand there's some people who support it.
Moving on, property taxes. This is an issue that's been talked about for many years here in Harrisburg, yet we haven't seen much movement towards a solution. Do you support the total elimination of property taxes? And if so, how would you do it?
Yeah, the answer to the first part of the question is really the second part of the question. Until you know how you're going to do it, I believe anything that we do, I believe I'll support anything we do to eliminate tax burdens on working families and seniors. But you also have critical funding that needs to take place of transportation, of schools, of course, we talked about that, of our courts, of our police. And so you've got to figure out how you're going to pay for that. So what we would really eliminate is the school part of it. So if the schools are then going to be funded, we have to figure out, there's been talks about increasing sales tax, but you'd have to increase sales tax by a pretty large amount in order to make up for the property taxes, at least in my district. But we need to do things to look at how do you protect people from losing their properties if they pay the property tax. And you have to balance the fact that there are seniors that don't have any children in school and are still paying high property taxes, but yet there's young families that do have children in school, but they're also the ones that are working, and they're paying more in income tax. So taxes are a difficult thing, and I know someone who's paid them over the years. Nobody likes them, but at the same time, we have to figure out a way to fund government. So, but I've also been around long enough that I remember when we, going back to Act, I think it was in 2001, when we were going to eliminate property taxes in exchange for a 1% income tax, earned income tax, which we now have in several schools in my district. And then I remember when we legalized gambling in order to get rid of property taxes, which we didn't do, or the homestead exemption, which was a minor amount. So I do not support the idea that we're going to do tax reform. I remember back when Bob Casey, Governor Casey, was trying to do tax reform. If we're going to do something on property taxes, it can't be just to reform it, because it'll continue to grow. Our property taxes have never gone down in my district, despite years of trying to reform it. So if you're going to eliminate, then you eliminate it, but don't tweak it and say we're going to lower it a little bit in order to raise $1 in income taxes.
During your campaign, you spoke a lot about pension reform, and you're in a unique situation because living in the central Pennsylvania area, a lot of the people that are going to be impacted by that pension reform live in your district. So what do you tell these your constituents about pension reform? What do you tell them as far as why it's needed, and what type of reform would you support?
Yeah, so why it's needed is there's a $50 billion deficit. But what I tell them first is that I will fight to keep the promise that if you paid into the pension system, you deserve to get paid back. And nobody who's a retired worker now, who's in the system, should not get what they were promised. However, you have situations like in Detroit, now in California, where a judge came in and said you're going to take less in your pension. So we have to protect the pension system too, and that's going to require funding. But I also think that, I learned during this campaign that federal workers are in a defined contribution plan, like a 401k. The federal government has done that for years. So the idea that we can't, for an employee starting tomorrow, working for the state, can't go into a more private sector style defined contribution plan as opposed to a defined benefit, it doesn't make any sense. But I understand also that the less people that are paying into the old system, you're going to have to figure out a way to fund that. And how you fund it is, And whether or not people are willing to do it is a whole other issue. So the first issue is that we need to identify that there is a problem, and that's what I talked about during the campaign. We can't kick the can down the road. We can't ignore it. We can't pretend like there's not a crisis, because there is. And what happens when you ignore stuff, it ends up that the results are going to be more disastrous.
Out of the entire country, there's only 2 states where the state controls the sale of liquor. Liquor privatization has been a huge topic here in the State House for the past couple of sessions. And a few weeks ago, both the House and Senate were able to pass a historic piece of legislation that would privatize the liquor system. However, it was vetoed by the governor. What's your stance on privatization?
Yeah, it makes no sense to me. As a business person who believes in the free market and the private sector, why we think that the government can be in that business and do it better than the private sector. Utah is the other state. And again, why do we want to be in the business of selling alcohol? I mean, it just doesn't. I don't buy the revenue that it creates. We talked about the pension. Well, someone who goes to work for the state system, the liquor store tomorrow is a clerk, and stays there long enough, will end up getting benefits that we're going to have to pay for. Where a business doesn't look at it that way. You pay the benefits while the person's working there, and let them put in for their own plan. Or that's why we have other programs too. But if it comes down to what businesses, when a business looks at an enterprise, they say, how do we make profit? How do we provide the best product? And how do we run a business efficiently? And I don't think government does that very well. I mean, all you have to do is look at the post office to see that. So we should not be in the business of selling liquor. In the end, we have to, when we do make the change, we've got to figure out a way to do that's fair, that provides the good product at a fair price and convenience like they do in other states. But I've spent some time in other states, and the idea that you can't walk into the Sheetz and buy a beer doesn't. The other people coming from California or New Jersey say that they don't understand that. So yes, I would support privatization of the liquor system and not modernization. That doesn't do any good. I need to privatize it.
Let's take this a step further in regards to privatization. You talked about how government is not the best entity to run a business like this, but is it appropriate for an agency to oversee itself as it's selling the product that they basically have a monopoly on in the state? Do you feel that's an important issue also, that in regards to privatization, and as to another reason why we should privatize? Well,
sure, and I think to me it's even a bigger issue. I mean, I'm not a big drinker. I'll have a glass of wine occasionally, but does the government really want to be in that business where they're selling alcohol? And I guess that to me it's that, as well as I don't believe that the government can be as efficient and as productive as a business can be. But I've also talked to some people from state workers that say, well, we'll have more people working at the Liquor Control Board if it's privatized, because someone's got to make sure that these entities aren't selling alcohol to minors. So I think there's a compromise too, where we figure out a way to allow maybe more grocery stores and convenience stores to sell alcohol without necessarily shutting down the state stores or selling the state stores as their leases come up. I mean, there are obligations too, and we also have to figure out a way to pay for the legacy costs for all the people that have worked for the state stores, and how we make sure that the ones that want to continue to work have places to work too. So the one thing I'm learning in only a few weeks on the job is that there are 5 sides to every issue in Harrisburg.
Over the past couple of weeks, obviously since July 1st, budget impasse, the multiple vetoes by the governor has been front and center on the media. But the one issue that may be eclipsing the budget impasse is charges that were filed against Attorney General Kathleen Kane. Members of the House already introduced a resolution that would start impeachment proceedings. Would you support an effort to impeach Attorney General Kane?
Yeah, I need to learn more about the issue. I mean, part of it was that I spent 2 months campaigning door to door and didn't watch any news or newspaper. And I'm trying to get caught up on the budget and the pension. I think from what I've read, if the charges are true, not only should she should probably just step down. And Governor Wolf has called for her to step down. State Senator Teplitz has called for her to step down, both Democrats. So I think that she knows what she did, and she knows whether or not she's guilty. And if she is, she should step down and either defend herself or plead guilty. But I think I need to learn more about whether or not there should be an impeachment. And I just don't know. I mean, a big part of me believes you're innocent until proven guilty, and that presumed innocence. I'm not saying that there's only a small part of me that doesn't believe that. All of me believes that. But when you're looking at this issue, and certainly an impeachment proceeding isn't saying that she's guilty, but it gives the House a chance to consider that. So, for the time being, I think she should do the right thing, which is probably step down and avoid the distraction. But I'll reserve judgment on whether or not she should be impeached until I have more evidence.
Okay. And as the newest member of the General Assembly, if you were told you could have one bill that you could get passed out of the House and Senate, sent directly for the governor's signature, and he would sign it, what would that bill be? What's the most important issue?
Wow, solving the pension crisis. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but I know very well. I have low expectations of what a freshman member of the legislature with 203 members and a Senate and a different party running the governor's office is going to get done. But I truly believe that if we don't do something about this pension problem, our children are going to suffer, and we're not going to have the economic viability that we need. So that would be the one issue if I had a magic wand, that would be it. Now, what that bill would say is a whole different story.
All right, Representative Rothman, again, congratulations on the special election win, and looking forward to hear more from you in regards to all these important issues that you found yourself being involved in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you have comments or questions about this or any other legislative topic, Representative Rothman's contact information will be on the screen in just a moment. I'm Anthony Tezak, and thanks for spending a few minutes with State Representative Greg Rothman.